Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm bringing you a video about the story of Tieu San and CEO Hai. Tieu San entered Hai's life not with brilliance or glamour, nor with anything that would immediately dazzle or inspire admiration at first glance. She appeared quietly, like a slow breath amid the busy rhythm of his life. Tieu San came as a woman who had been through many wounds, a single mother who had tasted exhaustion, worry, and countless nights where she could not allow herself to fall apart, because behind her was a small life she had to protect. Little Ivy, her child, was not only her flesh and blood, but her entire world, the sole reason she remained standing after everything she had endured. Hai met Tieu San at a time when he believed his life was already perfectly arranged. His career was stable, his position secure, and in the eyes of others, his future stretched out as a straight, predictable path. Yet it was precisely her quiet presence that made him slow down. In Tieu San, he saw something different, someone who did not show off, did not seek attention, and did not long to be sheltered by flowery promises. She lived calmly, moving carefully step by step, always placing her child above every choice and decision she made. And it was exactly that which made it impossible for Hai to look away. Hai's love for Tieu San was not loud or hurried, nor was it a passion that flared up fiercely only to fade away. His love came slowly, but it grew deeper with time. He loved the patience reflected in her smallest gestures, loved the way she always thought of others before herself, and loved the quiet strength she hid behind her composed exterior. There were pains Tieu San never spoke of, yet Hai could still sense them, in the subdued look in her eyes when night fell, in the moments she sat silently beside her child, gently stroking Ivy's hair as if afraid that letting go for even a second would cause the world to tilt once again. However, even before this love could be named, it had to face a major barrier, an invisible wall heavier than any open objection: Hai's mother. In her mind, Tieu San was not the kind of woman she had ever imagined for her son. Tieu San did not fit the old standards of being untouched, and she carried with her a child who was not Hai's by blood. To the mother, this meant burden, responsibility, and consequences she feared her son would have to shoulder for the rest of his life. She was afraid Hai would be tied down too early, afraid his future path would no longer be complete, afraid the expectations she had placed on him for so many years would slowly drift off course. She did not protest loudly, nor did she use harsh words to push Tieu San away. Her rejection came in the form of indifference, in the distant looks, in the invisible gap at family meals, in the way she spoke only to Hai while barely offering Tieu San a genuine word of concern. That silence was what weighed the heaviest. It was deep enough for Tieu San to understand that, in her eyes, Tieu San had never truly been someone to welcome. Tieu San realized this very early on. She was not naive enough to believe things would change simply through effort or goodwill. Yet she did not resent it. She chose silence. She chose to stay in her place, neither stepping forward nor retreating. She remained polite and measured in every word and action. She did not try to win favor, did not attempt to prove her worth, nor did she justify her past. To Tieu San, everything that had happened was a part of her life, nothing to hide, and nothing to expose in search of pity. She understood clearly that some distances cannot be bridged by humility, and some prejudices cannot be erased through endurance alone. Still, Tieu San chose to stay. She chose to love Hai in the quietest way possible. For her, as long as Hai believed in her, as long as he was steadfast enough to hold her hand amid judging eyes, that was enough. She did not seek privilege or a central place. The only things Tieu San wished to protect were peace for her child, and the sincerity of the love Hai gave her, a love that did not need to be displayed, yet was strong enough not to waver easily before the trials silently waiting ahead. Until one day, a sudden crisis struck, without warning, without giving anyone time to prepare, and without leaving any room for hesitation or retreat. Everything came too fast, shattering the already fragile rhythm of people who had been trying to preserve the little peace they had for one another. That morning, Hai's mother left home very early, just like any other day. She went to the familiar market, along the same old road, her steps so routine that no one could have imagined that only minutes later, everything would veer in a completely different direction. The accident happened abruptly and violently, leaving behind the blare of car horns, chaos, and a motionless body lying on the road. When the phone call came, the voice on the other end trembled and broke apart, and Hai could barely comprehend the words he was hearing. In that instant, his world collapsed. Everything before his eyes went dark, his heart pounded erratically, his breath coming in gasps. He couldn't think, couldn't process anything in order. He only knew to grab Tieu San's hand, pull her into the car in a state of panic, and rush toward the hospital, both of them consumed by a fear they had never known how to name. The hospital that day was suffocatingly crowded. The smell of antiseptic, the hurried clatter of stretchers, the urgent calls of nurses, all blended together into an atmosphere so tense it was hard to breathe. Hai's mother was taken straight into the operating room. The doors closed, cold, decisive, cutting Hai off from his mother before he could say even a single reassuring word. The waiting felt endless. Hai sat frozen outside the operating room, his hands clenched together until they turned white. He had never felt so powerless. All his composure, his social standing, everything that defined him outside these walls meant nothing now. Before him remained only the fear of losing the one remaining parent he had, and a crushing guilt for having been so busy that he hadn't noticed how his mother had grown older day by day. Tieu San sat beside him, quiet but steady. She didn't speak much, only placed a hand on his shoulder when she felt him trembling. In that moment, she was no longer the woman who kept her distance, nor the one left outside the circle of acceptance. She was simply someone who was there, standing with him at the fragile boundary between life and loss. The surgery dragged on in unbearable tension. Every minute felt as heavy as an hour. Then the operating room doors swung open. The doctor stepped out with a grave expression, worry evident in his eyes. He explained that the patient's condition was critical, severe injuries, heavy blood loss, and the hospital was short of the compatible blood type needed for an emergency transfusion. Without blood in a very short time, all efforts could become meaningless. The word struck Hai like a cold blade to the chest. He sprang to his feet, then froze, not knowing what to do, not knowing whom to turn to for help. A sense of desperation engulfed everything. The air around him seemed to congeal, leaving only the frantic pounding of his heart in his chest. Amid the confusion, the test results came back. Tieu San was a compatible blood match. In that moment, Tieu San barely needed to think. There was no hesitation, not even a second of doubt. She nodded and agreed to donate blood immediately, decisive and calm to the point that it stunned everyone around her. Hai turned to look at her, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. He wanted to stop her, to say something, anything, but his throat tightened, and no words came out. Tieu San was taken into the transfusion room. She lay on the hospital bed, white lights shining down on a face already thin from months of exhaustion. The needle was inserted into her arm, drop by drop, her blood left her body, slow but steady. Her complexion gradually paled, her lips grew dry, yet her gaze remained calm. There was no fear, no sorrow, no desire for recognition. To Tieu San, this was not a noble sacrifice or an act that needed praise. It was simply what should be done. Because that was the mother of the man she loved. Because if today she could do something to save a life, there was no reason to refuse. As she lay there, she did not think of the coldness she had endured, the guarded looks, or the times she had stood outside acceptance. She thought only of a mother lying on the edge of life and death, and of a man outside, nearly collapsing under the weight of his helplessness. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting her body grow weaker with each pulse of the transfusion. In Tieu San's heart, there was no resentment and no expectation. There was only one clear feeling: if this love had already required her to walk through so many trials, then this, too, was just another step on the path she had chosen, quietly, steadfastly, and without turning back. Hai stood motionless in the hospital corridor, his hands clenched together so tightly they trembled. He leaned against the cold wall, feeling as if all the strength in his body was being drained away. The steady, mechanical sounds from the emergency room echoed down the hall, dry, relentless, and every beat made his heart tighten. For the first time in his life, Hai felt two emotions he had never imagined could coexist so suffocatingly: gratitude and guilt. Gratitude, for the woman he loved who was lying inside, giving her own blood to keep his mother alive. Guilt, because that same woman had once endured cold stares, had stood on the edge of acceptance from his mother for so long. Hai closed his eyes, his breathing heavy. His mind was flooded with chaotic thoughts, but one truth stood clearer than anything else: if he lost his mother today, he would never forgive himself, and if anything happened to Tieu San today, he would never find peace for the rest of his life. Time crawled by, as if deliberately testing the endurance of everyone waiting outside. Then the doors of the operating room finally swung open, and the doctor stepped out, his expression slightly eased. The surgery was successful. Hai's mother had made it through the critical stage. That single sentence was enough to make Hai's knees buckle. He had to grab onto a chair to steady himself, his chest heaving as if he had just been pulled back from the edge of collapse. Before that wave of relief could fully settle, his gaze instinctively turned toward the transfusion room. A deep, aching gratitude rose in his chest, so intense it almost hurt. He understood then that his mother's life at this moment was not sustained by medicine alone, but also by Tieu San's silent endurance. In the days that followed, Hai's mother remained hospitalized for extended observation. Her body was much weaker and needed time to recover, little by little. Hai lived in a constant state of division. On one side was the hospital, filled with endless checkups and anxious waiting. On the other was the company, with major projects that could not be abandoned. The pressure from work was heavy, but his worry for his mother weighed even more. Some days, he could only stop by the hospital briefly, just long enough to hold his mother's hand for a few minutes before rushing off again, carrying an unshakable sense of guilt with him. During that time, Tieu San was the one who stayed by the bedside the most. She spoke little, never complained, and never showed her own exhaustion. At every meal, she carefully fed Hai's mother spoon by spoon. She reminded her to take each pill at the right time, in the correct dose. She cleaned her, adjusted her pillow, pulled up the blanket, doing everything with meticulous care and patience. When Hai's mother was awake, Tieu San sat and talked with her, even if the conversations were fragmented and interrupted by fatigue. When she slept, Tieu San remained quietly by her side, never leaving. Tieu San never brought up the past, never deliberately or accidentally reopened old distances. She behaved with restraint and respect, as if everything that had once happened had been gently set aside. Her devotion was not loud or demonstrative, but it was steady enough that it could not be ignored. Hai's mother saw all of this. During those long days in the hospital, she had time to observe, to feel. Gradually, she began to see Tieu San not only as the woman her son loved, but as the image of a true daughter-in-law, calm, patient, carrying no resentment from the past. She noticed how Tieu San always spoke softly, always lowered herself slightly when addressing her. She saw how Tieu San consistently placed others' comfort above her own. And then her gaze slowly began to settle on little Ivy. The child was young, yet polite and well-mannered. Every time she came to the hospital with her mother, Ivy greeted her in a small, timid voice, childish, but sincere. She sat quietly in a corner, never causing a disturbance, sometimes sharing small, innocent stories that lightened the heaviness of the hospital room. In Hai's mother's eyes, the child was no longer a stepchild, but a pure, gentle soul, carrying a natural warmth. As her health stabilized and her mind cleared completely, Hai's mother learned one quiet afternoon, when pale sunlight filtered through the hospital window, that it was Tieu San who had donated blood to save her life. The realization left her silent for a long time. She said nothing, only looked at Tieu San with a gaze that had grown deeper, heavier, and entirely different from before. Then she reached out and held Tieu San's hand tightly. Her hand was thin and weak after so many days in the hospital, but the grip was unmistakably firm and sincere. Her voice was hoarse, yet every word was clear, with no attempt to avoid the truth. "Thank you, and I'm sorry." In that moment, Tieu San lowered her head, her eyes reddening, but she did not cry. She answered softly, just as gently as everything else she had ever done. No more words were needed. In that clasped hand, in that brief sentence, all the distance that once existed seemed to dissolve on its own. The invisible boundaries in Hai's mother's heart, built from fear and prejudice, quietly collapsed, giving way to understanding and acceptance, slow in coming, but deep enough that they would never return to what they once were. After being discharged from the hospital, Hai's mother returned home physically weaker than before, yet her spirit had changed profoundly. The once familiar house suddenly felt quieter, slower, mirroring the rhythm of her life now. And from that moment on, the distance that had once existed between her and Tieu San was no longer maintained, not through any formal declaration, but through small, genuine changes in the way she treated Tieu San each day. She began to take the initiative to ask after Tieu San. No longer polite, surface-level questions, but sincere concern. "Are you tired today? How has Ivy been eating lately? Is work too demanding?" Her tone was no longer distant, her gaze no longer probing. Each time she looked at Tieu San, her eyes softened, carrying a natural warmth, as if that care had always been there, only now finally allowed to show. With little Ivy, the change was even more evident. Hai's mother no longer addressed the child with restrained formality, but with a gentler, more affectionate name. She paid attention to Ivy's smallest gestures, from the shy way she greeted people to the clear, attentive eyes she lifted when listening to adults speak. Some afternoons, she woodedly asked Tieu San when she and Ivy were free to come over for a meal. No special occasion, no particular reason, simply because she wanted the house to be filled with voices and laughter. The meals that followed were no longer heavy or strained. The atmosphere at the table grew warmer, calmer. Hai's mother served food to Ivy, reminding her to eat slowly. She asked Tieu San which dishes she liked, whether the food suited her taste. These seemingly small gestures meant more to Tieu San than any spoken acknowledgement ever could. She didn't need to hear anyone say she was accepted. Being treated as family, as a natural part of this home, was more than enough. In Hai's mother's eyes now, there was no hesitation, no calculation. Instead, there was a clear sense of contentment, and a fondness that came from deep within. She looked at Tieu San as someone who had faced life and death, who had come to understand the true value of kindness and sincerity. She no longer dwelled on Tieu San's past, no longer weighed the things that had once worried her. What she saw now was simply a woman who knew how to love, how to sacrifice, and who was generous enough not to carry resentment. Hai watched all these changes quietly, his heart overwhelmed with emotion. There were moments when he simply observed from a distance, not interrupting, not saying a word. He watched his mother talk with Tieu San, watched Ivy laugh in his mother's arms, and felt something rise within him that was hard to name. It wasn't just relief, it was deep gratitude. He understood that, at last, the woman he loved had been truly accepted, not through his protection or persuasion, but through her own steadfast heart and quiet kindness. Hai also knew that if, back then, Tieu San had chosen to turn away, to keep her distance, or to hold on to her pain and resentment, things might never have reached this point. But she chose to stay. She chose to love in the quietest way possible, and that was precisely what touched the firmest boundaries in his mother's heart. From that point on, Tieu San's place in Hai's family was no longer uncertain. She was not just his partner. She was the daughter his mother trusted, the mother who brought laughter to Ivy and to the entire household, the one who gently filled the spaces that once existed. Tieu San's presence was never loud, yet without her, everything would feel incomplete. The story of Tieu San and Hai is not a journey paved with roses, but a slow unfolding of understanding, patience, and kindness placed in the right moments. And it is these seemingly ordinary things that hold a family together in the most lasting way. Subscribe to the channel to watch the next episode, and don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts about Tieu San's choice. Would you have chosen the same path if you were faced with such trials?
Hello mọi người, mình đang làm video nha. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều vì đã luôn ủng hộ và theo dõi cho video của mình nhé. Trời ơi, tạm biệt mọi người. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người ở video sau.